SMS, Dr. Amy Khor.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, I thank members for speaking in support of the bill. Let me now address their queries in turn. Members have voiced concerns about the harm posed by passive cigarette smoke to vulnerable groups such as the young and the elderly, and asked what more can be done. Some, including Ms. Cheryl Chan, have also asked whether more no-smoking zones are being planned. The No Smoking Zone, or NSZAC, in Orchard Road is a new initiative. We decided on the shopping belt because the area experiences significant and dense pedestrian traffic and is a site for alfresco activities. Support from stakeholders was another consideration. We had strong backing for our plans from businesses and building owners led by the Orchard Road Business Association. We also considered the availability of suitable locations for designated smoking areas, DSAs. Given that the NSZAC would cover a relatively large area with numerous commercial premises. Since 2015, NEA has been working with building owners in Orchard Road to allocate sufficient space for DSAs. Today, about 40 DSAs can be found across the prospective NSZAC. As far as possible, these DSAs are located away from the main thoroughfare along Orchard Road to ensure smoking is contained and not done in clear view of passerbys, especially impressionable youths. This will help protect public health and avoid normalizing smoking. Like Ms. K. Thanalachmi, I hope that DSAs would become unnecessary one day. But we must be practical in our approach, given the large number of visitors and tourists along Orchard Road. Mr. Louis Ng suggested a pilot to prohibit smoking while on the move. Once the Orchard Road NSZAC is in force, every public place within the zone will be smoking prohibited, and smokers will not be able to light up while walking along the shopping belt. Outside of the NSZAC, smoking is already disallowed in many public places. These include sheltered pedestrian walkways, overhead bridges, and the corridors of public estates. Our priority is to implement the NSZAC well, monitor the outcomes, and make any necessary improvements. We will then assess the impact of the Orchard Road NSZAC and its DSAs before considering whether to replicate it elsewhere. The NSZAC will be brought into force in the coming months, and details will be provided in due course. Mr. Louis Ng and Ms. Cheryl Chan asked if we plan to provide DSAs in places beyond Orchard Road, such as in our housing estates. Unlike Orchard Road, our heartlands are where our homes and schools are, and where our young children and youths spend their time daily. DSAs typically serve as congregation points for smokers. The daily sight of people gathering to smoke at DSAs at residential areas may give our young the impression that it is normal to smoke. As much as possible, we want to avoid this. Furthermore, given the design of our housing estates, where HDB blocks are well connected and dense, it may be challenging to find suitable locations that ensure that DSAs are not too conspicuous. Hence, our approach has instead been to extend the smoking prohibition to as many areas as possible within housing estates where members of the public frequent, including sheltered walkways, exercise areas, and playgrounds. We will continue to monitor and enforce against smoking violations in these areas. Members have also called for restrictions on smoking in homes, including imposing penalties when smoke wafts out of a residential unit. Indeed, indiscriminate smoking can be distressing, and I empathize with all those who are affected. Nevertheless, homes are private spaces. We need to be mindful that not everyone would support the view that the government should intrude into one's private space on the issue of smoking. And indeed, the member, Ms. Rahayu, had alluded to that earlier. We have witnessed disputes in some private estates over the management committee's right to prohibit smoking in one's balcony, a private space. As Mr. Ng rightly pointed out, regulation must be balanced against privacy concerns. Moreover, if we were to prohibit smoking in one's own home, it would inevitably entail bringing to bear the necessary investigation and enforcement powers in our home. We must not take this lightly. Such an intrusive regulatory approach to tackling neighbourly issues could ultimately be even more detrimental to community harmony and ownership. Mr. Ng cited a recent US ban on smoking within public housing estate as an example of how a comparable regime could be implemented in Singapore. The US smoking ban does not apply to all homes, but only to public housing estate for low-income residents through the imposition of conditions in the tenancy agreements. Tenants who do not wish to comply with the smoking ban may have to look for alternative housing. The context of the US smoking ban is very different, and we do need to consider our local circumstances before adapting practices from abroad. We have been proactively addressing second-hand smoke in our housing estates. Over the years, we have disallowed smoking at common areas, including at the lift lobbies, corridors, and staircase landings. In response to Ms. Rahayu Mazam's comment that there is a lack of understanding about the rules relating to smoking in sheltered walkways or drop-off points, especially during rain, would like to clarify that the smoking prohibition applies regardless of weather. Ultimately, living in the community is about give and take. I urge all smokers to be considerate and to refrain from smoking in a way that would negatively affect others. Families and friends of the smokers, as well as the public in general, could help to reinforce the right social norms through nudges and reminders in order to help address this issue. In a spirit of good neighbourliness, we should try to understand one another's concerns, communicate and resolve disputes amicably. If professional assistance is required, residents can approach the Community Mediation Centre. Engineer Dr. Lee Bee Hua, Mr. Gan Thiam Poh and Ms. Rahayu Mazam highlighted the frustrations of non-smokers faced with inconsiderate smokers around their neighbourhood. They have asked about enforcement capacity and how we plan to make enforcement more effective and efficient in light of the growing number of smoke-free places. NEA has been engaging business owners about the Orchard Road NSZ and will calibrate its enforcement capacity according to the situation at the ground. Enforcement is necessary, but not the silver bullet. Instead, our deeper aim is to foster social norms that promote health and well-being. We need the community to help us remind smokers where they should not be smoking. Smokers must also play their part and be mindful of those around them before lighting up. Ms. Thanalakshmi also asked how technology can be further leveraged to facilitate reporting of unlawful smoking and errant managers. Members of the public can notify NEA about smoking violations through the My Environment app and One Service mobile applications. NEA is also exploring the use of thermal cameras to deter indiscriminate smoking, such as the ones that Ms. Cheryl Chan raised earlier, especially at corridors, lift lobbies, and staircase landings, which other members had also raised. These cameras are equipped with heat detection capabilities that can detect smoking activity and can be operated remotely. When deployed, these cameras will be able to capture images of the smoking infringement and facilitate NEA's investigations. In response to Ms. Rahayu Mazam's question whether the community volunteer program has enhanced enforcement of the smoking prohibition, let me clarify that the community volunteers or CVs are not deployed to supplement NEA's enforcement officers. The CV's primary role is to educate environmental offenders and promote environmental consciousness in the community. CVs can only ask for the particulars of uncooperative offenders and can give the information to NEA for investigation. CVs have been deployed in Orchard Road to raise awareness of the upcoming NSZAC and help ease smokers into the regime when it comes into operation. These efforts should also go some way in minimizing smoking violations within the newly prohibited places, a concern raised by Ms. Thanalakshmi. We should adopt a whole-of-society approach towards encouraging gracious behavior. This way, we can all enjoy clean air in the shared spaces around us, while building a stronger community. I agree with Ms. Rahayu Mazam and Ms. Thanalakshmi that public education is a critical plank in our efforts to create a smoke-free environment, and we will explore ways to further enhance that. Beyond encouraging smokers to be considerate, we also want to help them quit smoking. The Health Promotion Board will expand its outreach and support network through its I Quit campaign. The campaign will raise awareness about the harms of smoking and encourage smokers to kick the habit for the sake of their families. Mr. Gan Thiam Poh and Ms. Joan Pereira suggested providing smoking rooms in premises such as office buildings, public facilities and coffee shops. While smoking rooms may reduce exposure to second-hand tobacco smoke, they cannot eliminate it completely. The smoke can still seep into other parts of the buildings where people do not smoke. Hence, we have restricted where and how smoking rooms can be set up. Smoking rooms are only allowed in certain premises, such as office buildings and public entertainment outlets. However, the smoking room has to meet requirements, such as having separate ventilation and must not be used by any employee for work. Mr. Ng and Ms. Chan asked about the guidelines for smoking facilities. Within the Orchard Road NSZAC, a DSA must be demarcated clearly and be provided with at least one cigarette waste bin. The DSA must not be located where smoking is currently prohibited and must not obstruct public walkways or cause disamenities. An example of a DSA that complies with these requirements is the one located at Far East Shopping Centre currently. There, the DSA is inconspicuously located at a distance from the pedestrian thoroughfare and in the open, so second-hand smoke does not accumulate. Ms. K. Thanalakshmi asked that time be given to managers who are required to set up smoking facilities. NEA will give sufficient notice to the manager of a place to set up any DSA. In fact, businesses and premise owners have worked with NEA to identify suitable locations for DSAs since 2017, ahead of the establishment of the Orchard Road NSZAC. In the case of smoking facilities located within food establishments, such as coffee shops, I would like to update Mr. Ng and Ms. Pereira that since June 2017, smoking corners have been disallowed in new food establishments across the island. When the Orchard Road NSZAC comes into effect, outdoor smoking areas at food establishments within the NSZAC will also have to close. Existing food establishments that change hands and are issued a new license would similarly have to remove their smoking corners. We have taken these steps to increasingly create a smoke-free dining experience for everyone. Mr. Louis Ng asked about the rationale for the provisions on enforcement powers. The new Section 4A gives NEA the powers to enter and inspect smoking prohibited premises, as not all of these premises are freely accessible to the public. As I mentioned earlier, NEA has at times encountered challenges in investigating complaints about smoking in certain smoking prohibited premises, such as at pubs and bars, where uncooperative managers have denied entry by NEA officers. Managers who refuse NEA entry would now be liable for an offence under the new Section 4B. These provisions will deter managers from obstructing or hindering NEA's officers discharging their duties to safeguard public health and reduce abortive enforcement work. Nonetheless, the powers of entry will be exercised judiciously by trained and authorized officers. I've earlier set out the restrictions on the exercise of powers of entry. The new Section 4A also does not allow authorized officers to make forcible entry under any circumstances. The powers can only be exercised for the purposes of the Act, namely to enforce the smoking prohibition. Authorized officers will only be allowed to take possession of materials related to the suspected offence. In practice, we'll ensure that only officers directly investigating the case may assess the evidence. These amendments will also underscore our firm stance against abuse and threats made against our officers. Those found guilty of such acts will face fines of up to $2,000 for a first offence and $5,000 for a second or subsequent offence, or a maximum of 3 months imprisonment or both. Similar obstruction provisions and penalties are also found in other laws, such as the Environmental Public Health Act, or EPHA, administered by NEA. Under the EPHA, any person who obstructs or hinders an authorized officer in the performance of his duties under the Act will be liable on conviction to a fine not exceeding $5,000, and in the case of a second or subsequent conviction, a fine not exceeding $10,000, or to imprisonment for a term not exceeding 3 months or both. We will regularly review the penalties for breaches to the Act as suggested by Ms. Thanalakshmi. Last year, NEA issued 22,000 tickets for smoking, and there are calls from members for NEA to be even more effective and responsive in undertaking its enforcement duties. Taken together, these provisions will serve to enhance NEA's operational effectiveness and efficiency in discharging its responsibilities. Ms. Chan asked whether MCSTs have to pass a bylaw to disallow smoking within the compound of private condominiums. The answer is no. Smoking is already prohibited in the common areas of private estates, including the lift lobby, void decks, and common function rooms. So no bylaw is required to prohibit smoking in these areas. Regarding Engineer Dr. Lee's proposal to restrict the sales volume of cigarettes and increase the tax on tobacco, I will convey her suggestions to my MOH and MOF colleagues administering the tobacco excise regime for them to consider. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Deputy Speaker, the bill marks an important step towards our smoke-free vision. The Orchard Road NSZ will ensure a clean and healthy environment for shoppers and visitors. We have come a long way, and many segments of society support our push for a healthier living environment. Smoking habits, however, are hard to break, and we must persevere in helping those who are trying their best to quit smoking. The government will persist in our efforts to control access to tobacco products and discourage smoking through a combination of fiscal, regulatory, and educational measures. However, these efforts alone are insufficient without the help of the community. Families and friends should give smokers emotional and psychological support to kick the habit. The Orchard Road NSZ represents our commitment to safeguarding the health of the community. I hope smokers will also support our efforts to maintain a conducive environment for all.
Engineer Dr. Lee.
Thank you, sir. I have 4 supplementary questions. I would like to inform SMS that you can expand non-smoking areas, but because lack of enforcement, you won't see the end result that you wanted. Perhaps you can consider putting up designated smoking points like what we have done in Eastern South, because I see that there are more and more smokers who go and use a DSP. My second question is smoking in the presence of young children at home. Sometimes I see parents smoking in front of children who are very young, crawling on the floor. Is there anything that we can do to help these young children, because they are taking in second-hand smoke every day? The third question is on thermal camera. I would like to ask, how many does the ministry have, and when can they be deployed? I'm very keen on that. The last question I would like to ask is how to enforce non-smoking at common area in condominiums, because your officer won't be able to go in. Thank you.
SMS.
Thank you. For setting up of more DSPs, your comment about, if you have an NSAC and they don't comply, then it will not be effective. I think it's precisely because of this that we are only implementing the NSAC first in Orchard Road, because we want to monitor the outcomes. For instance, we want to ensure that there is high compliance and that the DSAs are appropriately used. The locations of the DSAs will also be important, how they are designed and so on. So that's the reason why we are saying that we will implement it at the Orchard Road area. We'll look at it before we decide if we will replicate this. With regards to setting up more DSPs, as I've noted earlier, if you're talking about in housing estates, I think one of the issues to us is really that because of the density of housing estates, for instance, and the fact that housing estates are where the schools are, where the homes are, there is a challenge, in fact, with implementing DSAs in this area, because you need to look at the locations. It cannot be too conspicuous. You don't want to normalize smoking among children, because DSAs are the area where people congregate and so on. And that's why our approach as of now is to increase the number of smoking prohibited areas even within our residential estates, to sheltered walkways, to even playgrounds, pedestrian crossings, and sheltered walkways, playgrounds, and so on. And in fact, and common corridors, for instance, lift landings and lobbies. And in fact, they're actually the only area, the very few areas, like Ms. Mazam said, where they can smoke. One of them would be in the homes. Yeah. So, but we take your point. As I said, we will we will monitor the outcome of the Orchard Road NSAC before we decide if we will be expanding. Regarding protection of young children of smokers, I think we need to strike a balance between forcing our values and norms on the parents, and the parents do have a duty and responsibility to protect their own young. And I think what we all can do really, as I've said, is through education, raising awareness, appealing to the smokers, to their families, their friends, their loved ones, and the community, to inculcate positive social norms, and to ask them to spare a thought for their loved ones, their children, and others around them when they smoke, and to smoke in a considerate manner. Regarding thermal cameras, we are not acquiring the thermal cameras ourselves. We have called a tender to get third-party contractor to provide the service. So we're actually buying service, but these thermal cameras have video analytic capabilities, and what they will do is that they will detect any strong heat emitted from the object, and then they will be able to capture images of the smoking offence. That will enable NEA to use these images to further investigate the alleged offence. And we will contract the services such that we can deploy the cameras, the services, where it is needed. Not yet. So we have called for a tender and we are evaluating the tender. What was your last question? No smoking. In fact, this is precisely why we have amended the Act. So Section 4, right, actually explicitly allows NEA officers to enter, inspect, investigate in common areas, which are smoking prohibited areas of private residential estates, when they have a reasonable, they reasonably believe that there is a offence being committed or have been committed there, or that there's evidence that a smoking offence has been committed. So, for instance, if a member of the public calls up to say that there is smoking violation, so NEA officers can actually enter.
Mr. Liang Yinghua.
Thank you, sir. I want to take this opportunity to thank the NEA officers for carrying out those enforcement actions, even in often in very difficult circumstances. So I want to ask the SMS. She mentioned that we are expanding more. Will be more areas prohibited for smoking, and even as we expand all this area, I want to ask SMS whether are there plans to step up or expand the enforcement team, whether there are enough manpower on the ground to do it. Otherwise, there's no deterrence. And also whether there are investment into surveillance equipment to also step up the enforcement there. Secondly, she talked about the smokers now at home. I mean, I want to ask SMS whether are there indeed more smokers now smoking at home, and is that because of more area that's prohibited from smoking, and therefore many of them have moved back to their homes and smoke, and therefore cause other externality to the neighbors and so on.
SMS Amy Khor.
Right. With regard to enforcement, as I've said, for the Orchard Road NSX, we will monitor the situation when the NSX comes into force, and then we will calibrate our enforcement capacity. But actually, indeed, over the years, we have increased the number of enforcement officers in order to be able, because of the expansion in the smoking prohibited places. But having said that, realistically, there is a limit as to the number of enforcement officers or the manpower we can expand, especially faced with our manpower constraints due to an aging population. So I think you are right to say that we would also have to depend, say, on technology. And earlier I did mention that we are now looking, in fact we have called for a tender to use thermal cameras with regards to smoking offence or smoking violations, say at lift landings, lift lobbies, staircase landings and so on, to help us with our enforcement. At the end of the day, I think that we, as I've said many times in my speech, that we also need the community to come together to help us with this. So this amendment to this Act would also, explicitly require the managers to be accountable, to be responsible for their premises, to ask the smoking violator to stop smoking or to leave their premises. We cannot be expected to be at every of the 32,000 smoking prohibited places or to respond to every feedback immediately. And we need the community to help us, including getting the smokers to smoke more considerately and stop smoking if they can. What's the second question?
People smoking at home?
Okay. Actually, our smoking rate has come down. I think earlier in my opening speech, I said that, as at last year, it's 12%. It's come down from 23% a long time ago to about 14% and then 12%. So in total, smoking rate has gone down. And by implication, that would likely mean that there ought not to be more people smoking at home. But having said that, every case of smoke wafting into a neighbor's house, for instance, to that person it's very distressful. And then people may be a lot more sensitive about second-hand smoke. But actually, according to our records, the numbers have not increased. In fact, we have actually seen some decrease in the number of feedback we have received about smoke wafting into a neighbor's house.
Engineer Dr. Lee, last clarification.
Thank you, sir. I have two supplementary questions. I agree that community plays a great role in this. I would like to ask SMS, is there any plan to step up education in schools? Is there any plan to work with MOE to step up education in schools? And the second question is that how many community volunteers there are currently? And is there any target or any plan to train more CVs, because I don't see that this is actively promoted. Thank you.
Thank you. With regards to the first question about education, we will continue to work with HPB and MOE on ways to enhance our education outreach to the young as well as to the population in general. With regards to the CVs, we currently have about 400 that's trained. We have no target for CVs, but we need to ensure that we have appropriate people who join us as community volunteers. So they will be trained.
The question is that the bill be now read a second time. As many as are of the opinion say aye. To the contrary say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
Smoking Prohibition in Certain Places Amendment Bill.
Senior Minister of State, committee stage what day?
Now, sir, I beg to move that Parliament will immediately resolve itself into a committee on the bill.
The question is that Parliament will immediately resolve itself into a committee on the bill. As many as are of the opinion say aye. To the contrary say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
The question is that clauses 1 to 8 stand part of the bill. As many as are of the opinion say aye. To the contrary say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Bill to be reported. SMS, Dr. Amy Khor.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to report that the bill has been considered in committee and agreed to without amendment.
Third reading what day?
Now, sir, I beg to move that the bill be now read a third time.
The question is that the bill be now read a third time. As many as are of the opinion say aye. Aye. To the contrary say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
Smoking Prohibition in Certain Places Amendment Bill.